They are us. Welcome to Sabbath school this morning. Our lesson this week is lesson number 5. And we are studying in Genesis 9, 10, and 11 this week. But before we get started, let's just begin with a word of prayer. Lord, most holy Father, as we open up your word, I just ask that we would do so with your abiding spirit, that we would be reverent, we'd be thoughtful, and that your spirit would open up our hearts, our minds, our imagination to grasp a deeper picture of the history of our earth and how we fit into that picture and how we can gather lessons from the past to change our future. In Jesus' name, amen. There are 2 floods mentioned in the Bible. The first one is in Genesis. And you would all know that the flood that I'm talking about is Noah's flood, right? Flood number 2 in the Bible. Does anybody know where flood number 2 comes from in the Bible? Revelation, you're right. What is the flood mentioned in Revelation? That's right. The dragon sent out a flood after who? The woman, the church. So 2 floods, 2 origins. The first one to destroy wickedness. The second one to destroy righteousness. Isn't that peculiar? So our stories that we're going to look through in Genesis 9, 10, and 11 are kind of separate stories, but they link together as we go through the book of Genesis and look at history. Yeah. Yes. And the flood in Revelation, let's stop and think about that for a second. What kind of a flood was it? Disinformation. No, let's not get political. You're right. It was on so many different angles. A flood by nature is too much of something, right? And as we look at history, we look through the Dark Ages, the church got pretty thin at times, didn't it? The scripture was, Spirit of Prophecy said the scriptures were very close to being gone. But then, was the devil winning in that method of war? It appeared so, but what happened to the church? It became more pure. I mean, when your life was on the line, you didn't take that decision lightly, and it purified the church. So to the close of the Dark Ages, Satan switched his tactics, and instead of decimating the church and pulling people out of it, his mode was to do what? Destroy within, to flood the church with the unconverted. And so we look at the church today. How many people are being destroyed by affluence in the church today? Majority, yeah.
I can't quote this exactly, but if you go back to the book Testimonies by Ellen White, Volume 1, I believe it's on page either 91 or 93. She's talking about the trip that her and James are making to Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
He became extremely ill. And she makes the comment. The devil wants to do one of two things with us. Either take our lives or cause us to be ineffective.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact quote, but that's his objective.
I was listening last night. I was listening to several chapters on the audio book Prophets and Kings about the life of Solomon. And in the early chapters of Solomon's life, it was an unbelievable success of Israel. The godliness and the righteousness to which that nation attained. But then, like right in front of Solomon's face, it was all taken down. I mean, you could just be looking right at it. I mean, Solomon, he was acute. He was aware. His intellectual capacity was great. But yet, right in front of his eyes, he became a tyrant.
It's interesting, though, because before his actual winning, I don't remember what part of the Bible you look into, but Bathsheba is objecting to Solomon being married to the daughter of Pharaoh of Egypt.
Yeah.
And David said, no.
So, coming back to our story, well, before we come back to our story, this kind of in front of your face sort of thing, there was a TED Talk being done by a guy, I think his name was Joel Robbins. He's a professional pickpocketer. And he started the lecture with, close your eyes, what am I wearing? And, it's like, whoa, wait a minute. We've been looking at this guy for several minutes now, and we don't even notice. Well, you open your eyes. He's wearing a purple shirt, purple tie, and a vest, and a shirt and a jacket. He goes through his, 15-minute lecture or whatever, and at the very end of his lecture, he says, now, what am I wearing? And that's when people notice he doesn't have a purple shirt or a tie or a vest. He's got a striped gray color shirt. It's untucked and his suit jacket's open. And you have to go back and watch the video over again to catch what happened. But right in front of our eyes. He can do it with any one of us. But let's go on. Our story starts in Genesis chapter 9, verse 18 to 27, and my other half that's supposed to read for me hasn't gotten here yet, but she will. But for those who are online, I will read that so the sound will pick up on our live stream. Genesis 9, starting in verse 18, says, now the sons of Noah who went out from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham was the father of the Canaanites. What do we know about Canaanites? Anybody? They were trouble, weren't they? These three were the sons of Noah. From these, the whole earth was populated. Noah began to be a farmer, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and was drunk, and became uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, told his two brothers outside, But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it on both their shoulders and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. So Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him. And then said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants, he shall be his brethren's servants. And to verse 27, where are we here? Okay. And he said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant, and may the God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. So what's happening in the story, and what do we have to learn from it? Okay. How so? So peculiar that it was that there's no curse mentioned for Ham, but it's for his sons. Yes, he totally did. Think about this. There's very little data in the chapter there, in the verse, where are we? Verse 20, verse 21. And I was trying to look this up today, and I couldn't find anything, so I'm just going to throw it out there. See if you folks can find anything in Spirit of Prophecy about drunkenness before the flood. I'm not sure I recall any references to drunkenness before the flood. So, if you get curious, try to look it up and see. And the reason I was thinking of this is, I believe there were profound atmospheric changes that helped precipitate the flood. Atmospheric pressure changed, the upheaval of the earth, the changes in the atmosphere. Perhaps things were a little bit different, and we've got to recognize in that ancient culture there was no refrigeration, right? So when you harvested your grapes and you made grape juice, how long did it last? Well, it didn't go like 0 to 100 as far as fermentation overnight. That takes a process of time. So, I guess what I'm saying is we don't know if this was kind of a fluke of things are different now, Noah. We don't know the intent. We don't know the background of his drunkenness. Yes?
Well, I was thinking myself, we have every evidence the antediluvians may have had in their. We cannot say that they were camel riders. They had technology. There's evidence that they had technology that we don't even understand today.
Yeah.
We found tools, as an example, that we cannot duplicate.
Yeah.
Maybe they had refrigeration.
So, well, yeah, I know there are.
I'm not saying they have refrigeration, I'm just saying we don't.
Yeah, it's intriguing. The point being is there was an unfortunate event. The first reference is Ham saw his dad, but then you go to verse 34. There seems to be more of an issue of, if you read verse 34, Noah awoke and recognized what his younger son had done to him. So while the Bible doesn't elaborate on that, it sounds like something a little more proactive, and we just don't know.
He certainly disrespected him.
Certainly.
Probably laughed at him.
Could have.
Back to conflict with God's son, that is their grandfather. He
Yeah.
34, where's that?
24, excuse me.
Yeah, I'm looking for 34, can't find it.
Where am I?
9, 9:24.
9:24. Yes, 9:24, excuse me. So what can we gather out of this story? Don't drink. Yes.
Well, it also talks about behavior, and seeing his father's nakedness and what his reaction and his behavior was. And we as individuals and Christians, what should our behavior, particularly those that we're supposed to respect?
So in a society and culture that we live in today is profoundly immoral, and nothing matters, right? So it is important for us to guard the avenues of the soul. What we see, what we hear.
The other thing interesting is he did not curse Ham. He cursed his
Son.
descendants.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that I noticed, if you watch something that perhaps we shouldn't watch, and we watch that type of thing often enough, we become callous to its effect on us.
Yeah.
Even though it has a great effect on us. And so one of the things that's obvious to me here is that something had fallen apart, let's just say, in regards to the respect towards Noah as a father figure.
Yeah.
Do you suspect that Cain probably witnessed this? Child older, here are the things that were talked about in the family that he knew.
That's peculiar that you should mention it, because we go on in Monday's lesson and we go into Genesis 10. And Genesis 10 is all the genealogy things. And if you follow the names, it's peculiar that in chapter 9, going back to verse 18, and Ham was the father of Canaan. Well, he was the father of a lot more children than Canaan, but Canaan is mentioned. And if we turn the page, and I was really going through this morning. So if we turn the page, where does Cain show up again? In verse 6 of chapter 10. The sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. So it doesn't sound like he was the firstborn. So I guess we have limited data as to where Canaan and why specifically is Canaan mentioned, other than the question is asked in our lesson, on Monday's lesson, what is the purpose of these genealogies of the Bible? Well, as we go through chapter 10, it really sets us up for the history of all the rest of the Old and New Testament, actually. We start seeing, that's where these people came from. And for us today, it's just this mass horde of people over there, over there, east. But back in those days, they could probably all trace their lineage back to great-great-grandpa Noah. So they knew who they were, and it was just this inter-family conflict, and we hate you because you're our second cousin, but you went that way and whatever.
Today, you and I don't have the problem of saying, well, I'm so-and-so, and I'm the son of so-and-so, who's 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 the son of so-and-so.
Yeah.
But when you come to the Hebrew nation, genealogy is extremely
Is important. Why did that come to be? Why did genealogy come to be really important in Bible times?
Becoming of Christ for one thing.
To what?
Becoming of Christ.
So the Messiah,
Which we pick up, you know, when we come to chapter 12, we start thinking of that aspect.
It also makes prophecy valid.
what do you mean? Makes prophecy valid.
Well, talking about, like in Daniel, the whole thing, and going back to when the different time prophecies. So they went back, and then from Daniel, with the statue and those prophecies going forward, it could show how the Bible was very valid because of the prophecies that were in it that came true.
Mm-hmm. So, like I said, chapter 10 and the genealogy and all those names, how many of you, as you read chapter 10, kind of struggled to keep all these names in order? It's like, okay, where did they go? And so going back to Ham and Canaan, Ham's descendants from Canaan, his son, in general, where did they go to encamp and to live? The land of Canaan.
Plains of Shinar.
Canaan is listed 7 times in Genesis 9 and 10.
Really?
So, that, like you said, it sets us up to understand what's going to happen in the future, because Abraham is called to go to the land of Canaan. That becomes the land where God's people would be, and where Jesus would eventually be born.
So, in my Bible, it's actually got a little map, and it kind of shows where these different names, these different descendants kind of wound up living. And these descendants of Canaan, the Amorites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, Girgashites, what do we know about those groups of people later on in the book of Genesis?
They're enemies of the children of Israel.
How bad enemies? Later on, like in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about Abraham and his move from Ur of the Chaldees. Okay, so going back to chapter 10, who inhabited the Chaldean region of the map, Mesopotamia, in those days? Okay, so Ham, his descendants, they're going over towards the Mediterranean and the coastline. But there was another descendant so we're in chapter 10, verse 9, 8, 9, and 10.
And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Uruk, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar.
So whose family group swept down into the Euphrates and Tigris River valleys and inhabited that area?
Cush's.
Cush's descendants, primarily, the notable name?
Nimrod.
Nimrod. Does Nimrod have any historical... I'm asking this question for you, David. Where does Nimrod fit into the history of...
Well, his wife was Samaritan,
Okay.
and she worshipped the main religion in Babylon. And in that, women would go to the city square and offer themselves to strange men for intimate relationship.
Pretty crazy pagan rites and rituals. Yeah. And that comes into all sorts of
Pagan worship
that we see bits and pieces and remnants of today, even in our own culture with the traditions of Christmas.
Those people try to bring about a political revolution during the Medes and Persians, and then they were driven out of the way to Pergamos. In Revelation, it says, I know where you are, Satan, deceived you.
Yeah.
And then they were invited to go by the Roman Senate to Rome, which has been ever since.
Wow.
Read your history and follow the money, I guess, to say. So as we look through the genealogies of Genesis 10, yeah, we can see that it's the people that did not want to follow God. They went to the coastline of Mediterranean. They went down to Mesopotamia, the area of Babylon. But we also see, like we will see in next week's lesson, that's where Abraham came from and his descendants. So it wasn't this kind of cut and dry line in the sand, all the good people over here and all the bad people over here. We do see that mixed up with the people that were setting up to build Babylon. There were righteous people that were telling the others, don't do this, it's not right. But they did it anyway. As we go on, chapter 11, 1 to 4. We're on Tuesday's lesson if you're following.
And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach into heaven. And let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth.
So what are the... Okay, first of all, it doesn't say anything about who, but where did they go? In verse 2? They found a plain, where?
Land of Shinar.
In the land of Shinar. Now we go back to chapter 10. Who was it that went to Shinar?
Wasn't it Cush?
It was. Where do we see that name Shinar? The first. If you go back to chapter 10, 10:10. What's it say?
Yeah. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Uruk and Akkad, Calneh and the land of Shinar.
Who was the him in verse 10?
Cush.
Nope.
No. Oh, Nimrod.
It was Nimrod.
Yeah.
So do the detective work when it says in chapter 11, it came to pass that they journeyed from the east and they found a plain in the land of Shinar. Who's the they? It's Nimrod and his tribe. And started building. Okay, so they came down, Nimrod's descendants, Nimrod's crowd. Now what are they saying in verse 3? Come, let us make bricks and bake them. What does the baking process do to bricks?
Hardens them.
Sets them up, makes them hard, right? So, what good would that do? Making better building materials. if you're building a little house, you don't necessarily need to bake your bricks. You can just let them sun dry and harden into, if you look at the archaeology, the houses that were built with mud bricks, they weren't fired bricks. They were just dried bricks. And if you used clay, clay would dry pretty hard. But again, you're building a small house, but they're firing their bricks. Why would they want to do that?
I think they fired the brick because it gave it better load capacity. So
Yes.
in other words,
Yes.
you stack a much higher weight limit on top.
So in that little paragraph, the end of that first paragraph there in chapter 11, what are they doing? What do they have in their minds? They're building brick, they're firing them, they're using mortar for the bricks, and they said, let's build for ourselves a city and a what?
A tower.
A tower whose top reaches to heaven. Spirit of Prophecy says they've done a number of things, but one of the reasons why they wanted to get up there was maybe if we could get this thing high enough up into the clouds, we could figure out what made the flood. I thought that was kind of intriguing reasons. Maybe if we build a ladder up high enough, we can figure out where that water's coming from and turn the faucet off. Yes?
You know, I'm sure it was hard to them, but also, like the Ishtar Gate is in the museum in Berlin, and it has the pictures of lions, the winged lions.
Oh, yes.
They glazed it also.
Yeah. They knew how to do glazing. So, looking at what they said, okay, where are we here? Verse 4, let's build a tower whose top reaches to the heaven. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad. What's going through their mind? They knew what?
Being scattered, they were trying to outmaneuver God, thinking, like God, he might, we got a lot of intelligence here, and he dispersed that, people in trouble.
Well, they were obviously paranoid about being scattered
Why would that be?
because of the flood. I don't know.
So, when we scatter, we lose our strength. Yes?
I think what it really boils down to is a rebellion against God. Plain and simple.
God said, when the people came out of the ark, what did God say?
Be fruitful and multiply.
Disperse and earth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now think about this. This wasn't too many generations from, and no doubt they had plenty of oral history. I was thinking about this. No doubt they heard the stories of Cain. What was part of Cain's punishment? He was marked, but what else? He was banished.
He was not, but he
Sent out. Yeah.
he had been able to get much out of the ground, and now he couldn't get anything because it
Okay.
was cursed for him.
Okay, so, but you look at the curse of Cain to banishment and to wander and to just go out there and live a nomadic life, and now that, again, how many generations? Not too many generations, and now God is saying, go out there, you know, and perhaps in the back of these people's minds is, that sounds a little bit like Cain, just to go out and live a nomadic. We don't want to live in tents. We want to live in a house. We want to live in a big house.
Well, Cain was the one that built the city.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't say anything about Shem building the city.
Yeah. So
Remember whenever after World War II, and when the United States, after Hitler was defeated, and the United States started plucking all their scientists, and then we got the atom bomb. You had a lot of towns
Mhm.
whatever you cluster together. There's a lot of strength in that. And you wouldn't want to lose it in part because the U.S. is gathering that talent and others.
There has been many research. How do I say that? That sentence isn't going to work. Okay, there has been much research about population dynamics and crime. The higher the population density, always, the more crime.
That happens in mice too.
Oh, you're getting ahead of me.
Sorry.
Shh, bad girl.
We've been married a long time.
She knows this. So when we were in college, I was taking care of the biology department animals, and in this particular time we had a lot of mice. They would use mice for experiments and stuff like that. Nothing really bad, but I was keeping a number of mice in one enclosure, and it was probably about this square. And I put cardboard and sticks and all kinds of stuff, and there was probably 50 mice in there. We crowded it, and so it became kind of a mouse metropolis.
Ghetto.
And I could see what the research says is mice will form gangs, and they will start marauding each other. They will start killing each other. They will start cannibalizing, yes.
And homosexuality.
Procreating without the appropriate hormonal permission. Is that polite enough? The same thing that you see in the cities is just this barbarity that comes in, and man, you could see it there with the mice too. It's any time you start crowding. And what was the particular thing as we go on Wednesday's lesson? We go a little bit further into Genesis 11. If you would read Genesis 11, 5-7.
And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they began to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech.
Is God omnipresent? What does omnipresent mean? Everywhere, all the time. The Bible says God is spirit and can inhabit a dimension that we can't really understand. So why does it say that God came down to see what they were doing? Could he see what they were doing there? Yes.
It's interesting because even those in other worlds could watch what was going on. And it's interesting because I think really what's happening is you have to remember who wrote Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
When it was written, and the context under which it was written. And I'm thinking that God knew what was going on, so he kind of gets to the point, I've got to do something about this. So it puts the human context
Mm-hmm.
down.
And you see that quite often. He came down to address the fall of Adam and Eve. He came personally. He came personally in the burning bush to Moses. There are these particular times, Sodom and Gomorrah, which says what? Yes. The concept of deism is that God made the thing, put the ingredients together on the pot, in the pot, on the stove, turned it up, and then walked away, sort of thing. Weird analogy, I know. But here we see, no, God is involved. Sodom and Gomorrah, he came down to see for himself. And in this case, they're building a what? A tower Well, let's go down and see. Yes, dear.
Well, can I read some other verses that go along with it?
Please do.
Okay. Psalms 139, 7 through 12, I believe. Whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. Yea, the darkness hideth not from thee, but the night shineth as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to thee.
So, what does that passage in Psalms contribute to our Genesis 11 story?
He sees everything. He knows what we're up to.
Sees all, sees the whole thing inside and out. But yet, Genesis 11, he comes down to see for himself. And verse 6, what does he see? This is interesting. The level that the Lord sees, think about the brilliance of this. So the people are working together. They build a city, they build a tower. It's an affront to God because they're doing this to create a name for themselves. They're trying to discover the secrets of God. If we could just get this tower tall enough. The tower, we're told in prophets, patriarchs and prophets, that it also was a center of worship. It was lavishly adorned. And God comes down and looks at it. And what is the one thing that God says that it's all hinging on?
Communication.
Communication. How do you mean? Dennis?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did they know he came down?
We don't know.
It tells us.
It doesn't.
He was there. He came down. People know he was there.
Well,
I want to see the replay of this one.
After they had to know, because he struck the top of it with lightning, and it just took, the top went off. So they had to know at least by then, because God spoke in thunder and lightning.
Yeah, but did they know? What he's asking is, did they know that God came down? Did he come down in a visible, as a sojourner? Like he came to...
It doesn't appear so, because
Abraham.
they're not blaming him.
Well,
they're just saying we're confused and we're moving on. And they
we
scattered.
just don't know, do we? Yes.
It's interesting. There could be some assumptions made.
Maybe.
But it's interesting because God is inspiring the writer. So the story had to have been passed on for several generations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it would be an interesting fireside story. But how do you know that God came down? Because there was evidence that it was there, but we don't have anything in the text that tells us that he met with a righteous person and explained to that person what he was doing and why.
Yeah.
As it does in other stories.
Like in Abraham's story. Yes.
This verse on the screen reminds me of what God said after Adam and Eve sinned. And it also, he said, lest they have access to the tree of life.
Mm.
But when he created them, he didn't want them to be one. And now he doesn't want the people to be one because he knows that that's going to lead to greater people.
Yes. So what you're seeing is the wickedness of mankind, just like before the flood, and that's why we had to check it. It's growing too fast for the amount of time that I've set up as Earth's probation. If wickedness comes to fruition too soon, the whole story, the plan of salvation, won't be able to play itself out according to prophetic structure. Yeah.
Well, I mean, God doesn't want a family, husband and wife, to split, but he does want to spread the gospel. And that's when he said, be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, go out there and share. That was the point of saving that family that was willing to get on the ark, was to go out and share God. And when he saw that this group of people were pretty proud and saying, let's do this, build this tower, so we won't be scattered, and trying to, and the evilness of the whole thing with the worship and everything, which they were doing horrible things to their descendants, that was something that he had to scatter. And he does want us as God's people to go out, not to congregate in one place, but to go out and share Jesus.
Yeah. So he comes down, he pinpoints the one thing that is making this all work is language. Do you see that? That's the issue that's causing this evil, this explosion of evil. They need to get out. They need to get out into the country, into the wilderness. Spread themselves out, dilute that spirit of metropolis, which, not to get political at all, but if you look up a map of the United States by county, you will see the biggest demographic difference in us as Americans when you look at a map of blue and red by county. And this isn't just unusual. From coast to coast, almost 100% of the densely populated counties are all of one particular persuasion, and all the rural counties are always of the other political dynamic. Now, I don't want to get into politics, but you look at, there's a profound difference in worldview of people who live in densely populated areas and rural, sparsely populated areas. It's fascinating. It's intriguing that in that one aspect you can see it coast to coast. It's not just a fluke in one part of the country or the other. It's the whole thing. But let's go on. 10 minutes. Thursday's lesson, did we just read 8 and 9? So the Lord scattered them. So I wouldn't have thought of this to hit the language, but changing the language scattered them.
We didn't. I don't think we read 9 either.
Did we read 9 and 10? Or 8 and 9? Okay, go ahead and read 8 and 9 for us.
So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth.
So simply changing the language destroyed the ability for them to work together to create this affront to God.
It does the same thing within a marriage. If there's not communication there, you lose the relationship. And when we do not communicate with our Father in heaven, we lose that relationship. Communication is huge.
Oh, this is fun. Communication. Do we talk the same language?
We're very different and opposites.
Okay.
But we have the same goals and we have the same...
We do.
Yeah, we do. And so, yeah, I had no idea you were going to talk about the mice thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just been because we're married so long that we just kind of...
mind. Oh, don't look at me. Do men and women talk different languages sometimes?
Oh, yeah.
Do we need to kind of figure that out at times?
But we can't read each other's minds, you know?
No.
So you have to communicate to be able to get along.
You have to communicate knowing that there's profound differences in how we think.
Right. Respectfully and kindly.
Because if we just blow off and communicate by how I'm thinking or by how you're thinking, we're going to miss each other, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And yet, I knew a young lady in high school whose parents could look at each other and tell what the other was thinking.
It's really creepy. When you start finishing each other's sentences. It's like, get out of my mind, that's secret. It is. Yeah.
Sadly.
So,
Larry.
oh, sorry.
I was just thinking about where the word Babel comes from. Apparently it's meant to be the God, or being God.
Yeah, the lesson brings that out.
Jesus talked about a gate, and he talked about a narrow gate. So here they have their gate, but God had others.
In the lesson, do you have the lesson quarterly, Kathy? Yes. So the little second to the bottom paragraph, little paragraph, the name Babel means door of God. So perhaps in their mind they are trying to find that door of God and discover where the rain came from, where does he live up there? The last paragraph on Thursday's lesson, the men of Babel had determined to establish a government that should be independent of God. There were some among them, however, who feared the Lord. Do we have to remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Or can we just write off certain types or groups of people? Just, they're freaks. I'm not going to bother with them. Can we do that?
No.
We can't. This is proof of that. In that crowd, they feared the Lord, but who had been deceived by the pretensions. What does that word pretension mean?
Assumptions? Pretensions?
Pretension.
Is that like assumptions?
Lying, falsifying.
Okay.
The ungodly and drawn into their schemes. So these righteous people who believed in God were drawn, without really knowing, into the schemes of this whole Babel thing. For the sake of these faithful ones, the Lord delayed his judgments and gave the people time to reveal their true character. As this was developed, the sons of God labored to turn them from their purposes, but the people were fully united in their heaven-daring undertaking. Had they gone on unchecked, so had there been no righteous people in there to give them a warning, had they gone on unchecked, they would have demoralized the world in its infancy. Their confederacy was founded in rebellion, a kingdom established for self-exaltation, but in which God was to have no rule or honor. Does that happen today?
Yeah.
It does.
How many times do we hear of somebody who wants to make a name for themselves?
And typically what follows in doing that?
Is corruption.
Well, it's self-serving.
When you're up at the top, you can make a lot of money, huh? On the side, especially.
So love of self leads to self-destruction.
And how many people do you have to stomp on to get up there?
Yes. When you're at the top, is it safe?
No, and they're paranoid at the top.
Everybody wants it. Yeah. It's not a safe place.
No. It's better to.
Yeah.
It's better to stay
So
at the
they
foot of
would
the
wind up
cross.
killing their whole family, sometimes their own children, to save their position.
They've had on the Disney and History channels, they have looked at Babylon, and it's pretty impressive even today. You know,
Yeah.
some of the rich
Mhm.
Imagine. Decadent.
So the Babylon that you're talking about, that history looks back on, is the Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar and his father, which was a little bit later in history. But you're right, the Babylon that what was Nebuchadnezzar's father's name? Does anybody know? I can't remember it. But he and his dad, the height of Babylonian rule was during this time. They built the city. Gold was just profoundly abundant. And it was one of the wonders of the world. The city, if I remember right, had like 25 streets, all straight, going the whole length of the city this way, and 25 streets going this way. So it was laid out in a perfect grid. The streets were quite wide. I mean, you think about it, in those days they were running horses and chariots, and they couldn't do this in little car lanes that we have now. So the streets were quite wide for commerce and travel and everything like that. The Hanging Gardens, you've heard about the Hanging Gardens, the watering system that they developed to water all of that. And you're right, it was a wonder. And the fact that it was militarily undefeatable, right? Because we not only have two walls, a double set of walls, but we have water going around the city and through the city, so we have water forever. Yeah.
It's interesting, though, I think if you look at some of the history, they talk about the fact that on the top of the walls surrounding the city, they actually raced chariots.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wide enough for chariot races. Can you imagine? On the edge of the wall. I mean, it was quite wide, huge.
So you're saying there was actually two that really wasn't, because they had said that there was this huge area that they figured might be that tower, base for the tower. You're saying that maybe there was two?
Well, so no, okay, so the whole tower thing was much earlier in ancient history
The Nebuchadnezzar.
than Nebuchadnezzar's time and the development of the city of Babylon proper. That crescendo of time didn't come until much later, but the people of Nimrod and his group started the whole thing back with the development of the tower and the city and those primitive times. That's something a little bit different than what comes a little bit later. Yeah, and it's the little bit later where we see the glazed bricks and the lions with the wings and all the opulence of modern Babylon. Yeah.
So because of the comment about the language, and there's nothing that they won't be able to do because of their ability to communicate, we see that today. They have computers.
We do.
Worldwide, one language, worldwide. And not only that, I read an article yesterday where they just developed a new chip yet that will make computers 100 times faster than the current.
100 times faster than 100 times faster than, yeah, they already were.
Genesis
Yeah.
10 and 20, it says that the sons of Ham, according to their families, according to their languages, their lands and the nations. And that's just prior to them all having one language. You can see what I'm talking about. What do they mean by that?
So,
Faith, not really language. Per se.
Well, in Genesis 11, God goes back and shows how that came about.
yes. So oftentimes when you're reading the Bible, you'll see a story developed, and then the next paragraph or two will come back and add more detail in that historical development, in historical story. Yes. Yes, often Bible's writers do that quite often.
Chapter 11 being expansion and
Yeah.
preview in a way of what happened in 9 and 10.
Yep. And our time is up. It's an interesting lesson, isn't it? It really sets us up for the rest of Genesis. But let's close with a word of prayer. Lord, most holy Father, as we read about the beginning of time in this earth's history, we see so much of the same thing happening today. It seems like wickedness is going on unchecked, that the people of the world are coming to speak one language and just doing crazy things against you. Lord, please help each one of us to take all of this serious, to guard the avenues of our souls, that we wouldn't be led off by pretense or carelessness into just a place you would not have us to be. Give us your Spirit and live with us and be with us today as we worship you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank